Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Naperville Astronomical Association Fundamentals Program for June 15, 2021. My name is Chris Almanza. Tonight's topic is my simplified workflow for pre and post processing of astro images. For now, I'm going to pretty much just switch off my video and then I will be sharing my screen. So please remember tonight, if you do have questions, post your questions to either the Facebook chat, or you can also send your questions to the Naperville Astronomical Association's groups.io email box. So I would like this to be an interactive presentation. So, again, please do submit your questions for that. Also, afterwards, this will be, it's being recorded and will be posted out to our YouTube channel, the Naperville Astronomical Association YouTube channel. Please go there for your later reference as well. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. So I'm gonna get right into it. So first, a bit of a lecture about taking your images. The first thing is why RAW format images versus JPEG. And something I've covered before in one of our earlier presentations regarding this, and there's a couple issues about that. First, the images, yeah, they're big in RAW format, but you can see here they are pretty large size files, but disk space is cheap these days, so it's not as much of an issue as it used to be. And so the second issue with RAW versus JPEG is the more important one, which is what we're talking about tonight. So JPEGs are typically processed in your camera. So whatever logic they put to trying to process an image to make it look as nice as possible, they apply that and you lose data. So therefore, if your images are JPEGs, you're going to lose some data and you're not going to be able to manipulate your images as well as you can with RAW. So I use a Nikon D5500 camera, and the RAW format is .nef, as you can see here on my screen. Hopefully you see that. Let me know if you don't. And anyway, so that's what my camera produces. .nef, that's the RAW format, and that's Nikon specific. So Canon is different. Each camera has pretty much its own RAW format. So you'll have to just see if your camera does that. So the start of my process, of course, and I'm not going to make us sit through this all, but you can see the last time I went out imaging, this is my camera card that I'm pulling up right here. I took a lot of images that night, not horribly so, but there's a lot of them. So if I go and select all those 155 images, that's not too many, but there's sometimes where I'll have over 300. But what I do then is take those and move them off the camera, mainly just to free up the space, but also to get them onto my hard drives in my system, which are faster SSD type hard drives. So whenever you're processing them, it's going to be a lot quicker. So as you can see here in this folder, I right away try to remember what I was imaging that night and create folders appropriate for the targets that I was shooting. And then that way I can go back later and do a search for those specific targets if I want to do something else with it. And you can see I have a trash folder because almost every night I go imaging, I end up with some trash images. And this particular night that I'm showing you on my this particular folder, almost the entire night was trash. So I had very little quality images. Unfortunately, it was a beautiful night, but that's what can happen. So that's one of the first things I do when I start my processing of my images. One of the other things I do, I'm going to start off with talking about some of the software I use. I used to, when I first started doing astro imaging, was just simply use the software that came with the camera. So this is the Nikon product called Capture, and it basically lets you do an image review, whatever comes out of the camera. And you can see here's an image that we'll actually work with later, a little bit later tonight, in the software. And with it being a raw format image, you can see that I can still go over here and make some minor changes to the image. As much as exposure, I can do the white balance, I can change some of those basic settings. And also let me know if you can't, I forgot to turn on my screencast, but you can change those. And it's very simple, very basic editing. You can't do a lot. There are some additional buttons here that you can go through and try to do some of the manipulation that most people will do with their astro images. It's not the best tool, but it's a tool that comes typically with everybody's individual camera. So it's great for processing maybe a single image. If you got one image, that's maybe all you need to do. And if you did capture your images in JPEG, this may be all you'll need as well, because like I said, the camera will have already processed a little bit, but you won't be able to change too much with this, and you won't be able to do a lot of detailed stuff. So, and again, may be sufficient. If you've got really good images from the start, then that may be all you need to do. So one of the key things that I do like to show on this app is this histogram, and this is the histogram. This is one of the key things we're going to keep working with all night tonight during this presentation. This histogram shows you the image data that was collected in the 3 bands, the red, green, blue. And this is actually what would have been displayed on the back of my camera the night I took the images. So what you want to do, if you notice, it's broken up into 4 different quadrants. And when you're taking your images, you want this histogram to try to get in that second from the left side of the graph. So on the left side of the graph is your darks, which you can see here is 0. Oops, 0, there we go. And then on the right is 255. So 0 being the blacks, and color or white is 255. So if your images are in this second quadrant, you're probably going to have some halfway decent images and something to work with. If it's all the way to the left, it's really too dark. It's going to be really hard to process that image, but you still might be able to pull something out of it, especially with some of the tools that we're going to look at a little bit later. So I think that's pretty much all I want to kind of cover on that. This is, again, I'm not going to spend much time with this product. This is, again, specific to Nikon. So one of the first things that I do, and I would have done it in that capture, but I also have another product which I like to use, which is called Lightroom. And what I would do would load up all those images. So I will do this a little bit here. It's because it's a little faster. Oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing there. What I will do with a night's worth of images is to first of all, I did forget to mention, I was going to go over the folder structure. I do notate when and what I did normally, so that's in general what I do with that. So what I will do is load up all the images that I want, and as you can see, I've already stacked this once before, so I'm going to switch it to details and sort it by the type, and then I'll be able to load up all my raw images here. So I only took that night of this target only, let's see, how many? 10 photos, only 10 photos. So that shouldn't take too long to load up. And what I'm looking for when I'm looking at these images in Lightroom. So Lightroom's an Adobe product. It's a pay-for product, and it'll let you do just a little bit more than that Nikon product. And it is getting constantly enhanced by Adobe, and you can do some more fancy stuff with it, but not as much as something like Photoshop. So what I'm doing when I first look at my images is how well aligned all my images are. So This is what I call my image review. And so what I would do is just flip through the images and see, do I have any streaks from satellites, from planes going through, or do I have any kind of clouds in the image, whatever it may be. So what I will do is I'll pull those out, I'll put them in a different folder. Most of the time I'll have a setup image or two, in other words, where I've taken an image where I don't quite have my target centered properly, or I'm making small adjustments to try to get it in the center of the image. So, and again, I keep those just in case, but I typically will end up throwing those away. So image review is just simply trying to make sure you're getting it down to your first, your best images that you have. And that'll come into play later. Another thing that I do during this part is I will take note of what I use to capture this image. So in this particular case, on here on this Lightroom, it shows you that it was shot at ISO 400. The focal length was 135 millimeter lens that I used with a f2.8 focal ratio. And then I took 179, probably actually a 3-minute exposure to capture this image. So I notate that only because I end up posting a lot of this to sites that have detailed information about images. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But a lot of people will post that information for other people who want to go back and try to capture those images as well, or create their own version of it. And so I just simply notate that in a notepad file, and I keep it with the pictures. And you'll see later, I name a lot of the images with that information embedded in the name of the file, just so I can keep track of it. And it comes into play later with what I call my final step, which is reprocessing, which I'll cover when we get to that point. But so Lightroom is, again, kind of a basic product. I do like it for at least reviewing, and I will edit like even my vacation photos in it because it allows me to do enough with that. And I do even take my vacation type photos in raw format because, again, you can do so much more manipulation of it. So if someone's image, their face is in shadow, you can actually go in and set it up so that you can lighten up that image. For now, I'm just going to get rid of that. And in here it says, oops, delete 10 photos. It's not really deleting it from the file or from the hard drive. It's just deleting it from the application. So that's Lightroom. I don't know if anybody has questions about that, but that's the basic original tool I use to just do my image review. And typically after I've notated all that information and make sure I have my best images, I move on to the next step. Now, the next step is, do I have one image that's really the only good image I have, and am I going to just process a single image, which is possible? Or do I have enough images, like in this case, I had 10 images, and I'm going to actually stack them. So there isn't too much of a difference between if it's a single image or multiple, except for with multiple, you're going to do a stacking step. So that's what we're going to go to next. Since we have 10 images there of that target, we're going to go to a stacking process. So the most commonly used stacking tool that most people use is called Deep Sky Stacker, and that's this product. But there's another one out there that's becoming more and more popular, which is called Sequitur, which is this product. They all work very, very similarly. I don't know if I have necessarily a preference one over the other. I use Deep Sky Stacker, it seems, more often than I do Sequitur, or if I'm saying that right, hopefully I am. The dynamic range of the image in Sequitur seems wider, and your images can seem to be brighter and more colorful, but sometimes it overdoes it and almost posterizes your image, which makes it look kind of fakey. So it depends on your starting image. If it's really dark, I might go to Sequitur and use that. But for the most part, I use Deep Sky Stacker. So I'm not going to use Secretor tonight, so I'm going to close that. Just know that there's other stacking products out there, and you can even manually do stacking in something like Photoshop. But there's tools. Why do it the hard way? Unless you're just so married to Photoshop that you want to do it there. But I don't see why. There's predetermined or pre-made tools for you to do that. One thing I did forget to mention is if we're talking about deep sky objects, which is what we were just looking at in Lightroom, versus a moon image. The moon is so big and bright that you may have a movie. So, and processing the moon is quite a bit different because you actually have surface detail on the moon that you're going to you're going to want to align properly. So there's two products that are typically used for that. And I'm going to show you that before I get into the guts of Deep Sky Stacker. There's one product here, which is pretty popular, which is Registex. So you can use Registex to process single moon images. And there's a whole process in this. And I'm not going to cover that tonight because I don't do that much lunar imaging. I do some, but not very often. And there could be, you could have a whole presentation on Registex alone. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of YouTube videos out there on how to use Registex in detail, more than I even like to do. So, but there's Registex is one of them. There's another product called Auto Stacker. Again, these can either take a single image or a movie that you've created. Actually, I should say either an AVI. My camera, my Nikon, takes movies, .mov. None of these products like .mov, so I end up having to find some kind of a converter that converts it to either an MPEG, MPG, or AVI. So that's typically what these two products will accept, but you can use them to do lunar stacking. You can also use it for planets because, again, you have some, depending on your image, you may have enough surface detail where you could use these two products to do that. So there's some basic processes you go through. It's just I'll kind of real quickly go over the Registex process, which is you would load up your image into this. I'm not going to do this. You would load up your image, you would go through the set of line points, which basically puts targets on your image. And then it'll assume that that set of pixels that target encompasses is going to be the same on each of your images, and therefore I'll try to find those pixels and align them. So that's what set alignment points. So first of all, it figures out where to put alignments, or you can manually do it if you think you are good enough with your mouse and targeting, or if you have some quite obvious target points, like let's say if you're doing Saturn, you could do the edge of the ring on Saturn or something like that. Or if you had like a Jupiter image where you could do the Great Red Spot, you can see it in your image and you want to target it and make sure that that specifically gets aligned. So you can manually set alignment points. Then you would do align. You would click the next button, which is align. And there's a whole bunch of these sliders and adjustments that you can do to try to help make this go smoother. So again, there's a whole video that you could do on just running Registex because there are a lot of different elements to it. So you can set limits on what, if you how like your contrast and stuff like that. Again, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Then it switches to stack and it does some more stacking and gives you more options, like should I do a gamma figure? It's pretty complicated. And then there's the final step, which is wavelet, which allows you to, again, make finer adjustments to the now you can adjust the RGB if you need to, although like something with the moon, it's pretty much black and white almost, and depending on your image. And but with something like Saturn or Jupiter, there is a little bit of color, to your image. So then you can adjust your RGB levels on the wavelet side, and do other things like trying to remedy grain and stuff like that. So that's, again, a real quick version of how Registex works and how doing planetary or lunar imaging works. I'm not going to cover that again tonight. That may be for someone else to cover, or if you want, go out to YouTube, and I'm sure you can find a video on how to use Registex or AutoStacker. So hopefully, if anybody does have questions about that, they can post those into, again, either Facebook or onto the Yahoo groups. All right, so unless I get interrupted, it doesn't sound like it, with questions, I'm going to move on to Deep Sky Stacker. Go ahead.
We actually do have a question about Deep Sky Stacker itself.
Okay.
Wondering how it compares using the automatic stacking that Photoshop can do too, if you've done that before. So if you used either or both of them to compare.
Yeah, so I have not used Photoshop's auto stacking. My understanding is that it does a pretty good job. It didn't used to. And I've done a manual stack in Photoshop. So I don't know if I can directly answer that. And I know I'm pretty intimately familiar with Deep Sky Stacker, at least more so than the process in Photoshop, even though I'm going to end up using Photoshop tonight. I don't know if it's how good it is. I don't know. So I'm afraid I can't really answer that. But I know Deep Sky Stacker works really well, and for the most part meets my needs. I know that's not much of an answer, but hopefully that addresses that question. All right, so if there's no other questions on that, we'll move on to Deep Sky Stacker. And most of the targets, like I said, that I do shoot are deep sky objects. I enjoy going after those. So what we're going to do, you pretty much go down this left side of Deep Sky Stacker to do your image processing. And there's several schools of thoughts on using Deep Sky Stacker. One school of thought is that you should do at least a little pre-processing in something like Lightroom to increase your contrast or exposure, increase that to make it lighter. But most people say, no, just go ahead and take it straight out of the raw file. Don't bother. It's, you're going to introduce, you have the chance, if you do a pre-process before Deep Sky Stacker, of introducing artifacts from whatever your pre-processing is. So, but if your image, like I mentioned earlier, if your histogram is way to the left, you may need to do that just to get Deep Sky Stacker to work properly. So it's kind of choose your battle type thing. Whether you think your image is good enough to have Deep Sky Stacker work, or if you think you need to do a little pre-processing to make it work. So, and take the risk of introducing potential artifacts that may or may not, that probably are not really in the image. So in general, I work with my raw files right out of the camera. I don't do pre-processing. I used to, but I think what I've come to find is if you're looking for an image that has higher amount of contrast, you're going to probably find out it's better to start with a dark image coming out of Deep Sky Stacker and then handle it in your photo editing product. You'll have a much richer image, I think, in my opinion. So again, whatever that's worth. So what I do is, again, normally I just work down this left side fairly quickly. We're going to, again, do this relatively quickly tonight. I'm going to go back to the other folder. Took this earlier this year, 311. And we're going to work on the Rosette Nebula is the image that we're going to do. And stand my fingers on the right key. So we're going to select all our images. Now, one of the odd things about Deep Sky Stacker is it doesn't automatically check. It says, oh, these are your light frames, but I'm not going to automatically check them. And you might wonder why, and it's because I've already done what's called score these images. And if you notice this column right here, it's called score, and it's basically telling you how good is the image going to be for the stacking process. And it basically does a rating based on how many stars it can find, if the stars are in similar alignment. So I've already kind of done that because I've already done an image review and gotten rid of anything that has really either clouds moving through it or something like that, because that can introduce additional data you don't want. So if you notice, most of these scores are already pretty similar, right? So they don't automatically check all these images because maybe you don't want to use them all. So you do have to come down here and say check all so that you can do the next steps. Now, one thing, people argue both ways, that should you do dark files? Should you do flat files? Should you do dark flat files, which is an interesting one, and the offset one. So should you do your lights, your darks, your bias frames? Some people say yes, some people say no, depending on what camera you're using and the quality of your images. So if your camera has a lot of, let's say, hot pixels in it, you're probably going to want to do your darks at the very least, because that'll show up in those darks, and Deep Sky Stacker will know those are hot pixels, and it will try to eliminate those. But if you're like me and I got lucky, actually, I think just recently I just started noticing the first hot pixel on my sensor. So I am going to probably start having to do a lot more darks than I used to, because I had a nice clean sensor, and my image never really had hot pixels. So I didn't always do darks, but I have done them, but I don't always do them. But I might start having to. So now flats, if I would have done my flats, which are basically just, so darks are, let me go back to darks for a second. Darks are taken with your, let's say, your lens cap on, and at the same temperature preferably, and for the same amount of time with the same exposure, everything basically the same as your light frames. You want it to be all the same. So if you're taking 2-minute subs and you got 10, that's 20 minutes. So you should take, at least 5 to 10 darks of the same. So you're going to potentially, increase the time that you're photographing nothing, basically. You're photographing the lens cap. So you're going to increase your time wasted on one particular target, especially if you're switching your ISO or your exposure length during the night for each target that you try to shoot in one night. And some people don't even shoot multiple targets in one night. I do. I try, mainly because as things move up in the sky, you'll get a better contrast up in the top of the sky versus down in the horizon, where it's going to have light pollution and what other atmospheric interference. So anyway, so that takes the darks take care of the hot pixel type issue, or amp glow or something like that. The flats take care of what I just had happen to me the last time I went out. Was I had a big old dust spot that was clearly evident on my images. The flats would have made it clear. Now the flats are basically, you're holding a white object, something that's nice and flat, that doesn't have any shadows being cast from it. And what most people do is like just a simple white T-shirt over a flashlight in front of their object, not in their lens. And you don't have to take the same length of time. You can take it as fast as you can. You should take at least 10 to 20 of those, and that'll help with something like dust spots. So, but again, do I do that all the time? Obviously not, since I did see that I had a dust spot on my last images I took. So, so in this case, I'm not going to do it. Again, I'm going to show you some of the steps further on. But you can load up your dark files, and you can load flat files in there and try to enrich your image for your final outcome to be better. So you can look at the images in Deep Sky Stacker. It'll bring it up here, and you can see some stars here, quite a few stars in this image. And you can even adjust the slider up here in the upper right-hand corner to try to expose more images or objects in your image. So you can adjust it. You can that's the mid-tone that I just adjusted. So this is the darks, the mid-tone, and then the light. So you can drag those around to try to get more stars to show up, or more, even maybe your target might show up if you adjust it. So, but you can see my target really well if you know what you're looking for. It's right there. But again, you can't really see it, but just now, this isn't actually editing the image. It's just for display. And if you have a specific target in the image, let's say if I was looking at the Orion Nebula in here, you could put it over the inner stars of the Orion Nebula, and you can even see how sharp your stars are. So you can see in the upper left-hand corner over here, well, as it moves around as I'm doing that, but you can see that my stars are at least nice and round, which is a good thing. And you want them to be as pinpoint as possible, nice and round, not bloated. They're a little misshapen, you can see, but so that's a good thing. Again, this allows you just to review your images. It's another way to do it. Now, I said I use Lightroom to record information about it, but it's also in our Deep Sky Stacker. You can see the ISO was at 400. They were 3-minute exposures. The aperture was 2.8, and I forget what these ones are. So if you don't remember what it was in Lightroom, you could also find it here in Deep Sky Stacker. I just always do it when I'm reviewing my images. That's just part of my work process. And it does show you the pixel size of the image, so you can see this is pretty big, 6,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels. That's going to be a pretty big image. Let's see. So that's pretty much that. So I've already checked all, like I mentioned. So the next step is to, oh, I forgot one thing. So let's say you find one, this is something I just recently learned myself. So there's still stuff I'm sure I can learn about Deep Sky Stacker. I haven't tried a lot of the really nitty-gritty stuff. But just saying, this is kind of going back to that question about the Photoshop stacking. You don't have to do a lot of tweaking to Deep Sky Stacker. It's already pretty much set. So that's pretty much why I use it. I don't have to want to know what all these other things are that I'll show you here in a second are. I don't want to have to know. I wanted to use it and get my image to the point where I like it. So one of the things you can do is, let's say you have one that has a really nice high score, like this 2463. That's a pretty high score of all these. Looks like the highest. And if you right click on it, you can click and say, use this as the reference frame. So it's saying, try to align everything based on this image. So that's a new thing I just found recently. And I don't always do that. I actually, like I said, I just learned it. So I didn't always do it. And it seems to figure it out on its own. So again, one of those things I don't want to have to worry about, but learning that new thing, hopefully it's going to improve my image. So the next step, as you go down the left side over here on the menus here, is register. And this is kind of the real crux of Deep Sky Stacker. So what you're gonna, when you bring up the setting, again, these are those settings I don't like to have to tweak if I don't have to. I usually use the recommended settings, and I don't hardly tweak anything in here. The only thing I might tweak is if I have a few images, like I do in this case, I only have 10 images, I might switch this to use all of them. So I'll set it to 100%. So I want to use all, don't throw any out. And I already know they look pretty good. So just to kind of show you though, if you bring up the recommended settings, anything in green is what's already been selected for you. Again, I use the recommended settings. I've never really played with them. So there are other things. If you still aren't getting your image to come out the way you want, maybe if you tweak around with these, it'll improve the image. Same thing with the stacking parameters. Again, standard mode for me always seems to work. Again, the reason I review my images to make sure the the images are almost identical. The stars that are in one image are in the same stars in the other image. I don't want to have to mess with these tabs. So you can just go through these and adjust these. But again, I usually leave it as the basics. I don't want to have to do extra work. And you can, if you've already registered them like I have, like I said, I already had these scored. You can uncheck this box so it won't do that step again, but for now I'll leave it just to show you how fast this works. And then the next thing, of course, is stack after register. If you don't want to stack right away and you just want to get the scores, uncheck that, then run this, and it'll do this registration and not stack, and then let you go back and choose which ones you do and don't want to use. So for now, again, I'm going to leave it on. Go to the Advanced tab, though. So this step you definitely need to do right away. And one of the first things you're going to do is this button right here. So you're going to say compute the number of detected stars. Now, I have the threshold, the star detection threshold set to 30% at this point. And that was probably because it was whatever I used on the last time I ran Deep Sky Stacker. So you can adjust this, and what you're going to do is click that button, and it's going to sit there and take that reference frame, whatever reference frame you selected, and try to find stars. And in this case, it came up with 2,103 stars. Well, do I need that high of a number? Some people would say yes, you want that many. For me, I'm like, I don't need that many. I think my pictures are already pretty much aligned. So what I will do then is say, let's increase the fidelity of that alignment by increasing this slider, this star threshold, to make sure I'm not picking any hot pixels. Because out of that 2,100 stars, maybe it was a hot pixel that you said, oh yeah, it's in that image, it's in that next image, and that next image, and it's not really a star, it's a hot pixel. So I increase it so that it says, no, I need to be more distinct about what exactly is a star. So then I click this again, and you'll see that this count should go down quite a bit, although there are a lot of stars in this image. So 631, I would even go higher. I'm like, no, you know what? I'm going to go all the way up to 90. I usually do whole 10 by 10. And you can see it does it pretty quick. Now it's just doing one image, right? So it's not doing all of them yet. So 400, okay. So I typically go with at the very least, 140, 150 stars. If it can at least find that many, that's pretty good. So there are certain images or certain targets that don't have a lot of stars around them, like some of the galaxies. You won't have a lot of stars right around them. A lot of the circumpolar targets are like that. So what you will potentially do is end up all the way down here at 10%, and that's fine, as long as you get around 140 stars that it will use to do alignment. That's what you're aiming for. So, but in this case, 90% is going to work. 400 stars, sure. Okay, that's fine. And so at this point, I would say, okay, I'm ready to run Deep Sky Stacker to start stacking these images. And it just, when you click OK, it brings it up. It says, by the way, you're not using any offset, no darks, no flats. So it does remind you, and so again, it suggests that you should use those, but it's up to you and what your quality of your images are. And again, stacking mode, standard. I pretty much never change that. Alignment method, automatic, sure. Again, I hardly ever change these things. My goal is every time I go out imaging is to get images good enough where I don't have to worry about changing all these settings to make something out of nothing. And I think that's probably every astrophotographer's goal. So one other thing it does tell you at this point, it tells you how many frames you're going to use, 10 frames, and it's going to end up with 29 minutes and 50 seconds worth of integration. So what I've done is take 10 3-minute exposures, and what it's going to turn this into is one exposure that's 30-minute long exposure. So that is your goal. So it would be as if you had taken one image and left your sensor exposed for 30 minutes, whatever sensor you may have. So that's the whole idea of stacking. And again, some of the best things you get out of stacking is getting rid of grain out of your images that can come from having a high ISO. So if you're going after those galaxies that I mentioned earlier, a lot of them, if you want to get a lot of detail, you may end up having to increase your ISO pretty high, but that can end up leading to grain in your images. But if you do stacking, that should eliminate that, or help eliminate it. I won't say it totally does, but it should help eliminate that. The other reason is that if you have light pollution, again, stacking, it's going to realize, hey, the dark background should be dark, and it realizes that. So, and again, it'll help create that darker background, and hopefully you don't over contrast your images. Some people do. I know a lot of people who usually starting out in the hobby do that. Yeah, I used to do it, but actually you lose a lot of image when you go too high a contrast. So something we'll get to here in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK at this point, and we'll see. It does give you an estimate on how long it will take. So right now it's registering all those images. So this might take a little bit. So it's going to take a minute, it thinks. Now, if I know it's flashing up here pretty quick, but it did say it's using 6 core processors. So this is a little bit of time for me to lecture about your hardware that you're using the software on. I've got a pretty beefy computer. It does have a lot of processors on it. It's got a decent amount of memory. I've got obviously a lot of hard drive space, and that can be an issue why it's doing the stacking. It does, especially Sequitur uses a lot of disk space to do some of its stacking processes. So you do got to be mindful of whatever disk your program's running on. It points to the right place where you got some disk space to do some of this effort. I've got a pretty decent video card in my system, so it should handle this stuff. I mean, I've got a lot of apps running right now, so what I'm trying to say is the beefier your system is, the better it's going to be able to handle these processes. So if it takes only a minute to do those registrations, and now it's going to take another minute to do the actual stacking, and realize that's only with 10 images and with a pretty beefy system. So the other day I had over 300, almost 300 images of one target, and I stacked, and that took, even on my heftier system here, still took like 20 minutes to stack. So do be mindful that if you're going to be stacking a lot of images, that it will take some time. So it's not something you could do on a live stream like we're doing right now. And that's kind of why I went with this target. It's only 10 images. It's something that will work pretty fast. Now, enough about the hardware. So the next step here, you can see right now, AutoStacker's creating with this called this autosave 01 TIFF. For the most part, you don't want to ever use that file. You're going to want to say, I'll show you the next step, which is you need to save it off to the resulting stacked image to your own file. Most people say you should just throw away those autosaves right away because they're no good to you. You'll find they're stretched inappropriately and all kinds of things. And you can even do, as you see, it's slowly drawing out the stacked image now. And you can even do some minor edits down here, which you can, when you save, either save those changes or not. But again, I'm not going to use Deep Sky Stacker to do my edits. It doesn't make sense for me. For me, it makes more sense to go into editing software and do my edits there. But at least here, what it's doing is at least showing you what it basically pulled out. And if you notice, you can start seeing the rosette nebula showing up here. So that's at least going to give you an idea that, hey, at least I've got something to work with, and that's a good thing. So what you'll want to do then after that, after it's stacked, is to save picture to file. And so, like I said, I've already saved this, so I'm not really going to do this. But you can say what I do again. Oops, past it. There it is. So what I do is I normally name my files. Sorry, let's put it to details here so you can see the full name. I embed all that information I was talking about into the file name. So this is the rosette. I used, in this particular, I used a lens that I went and rented from Helix Camera, not to give them any promotion here, but I went and rented a lens that I wanted to use that allowed me to do a 135 millimeter shot, 30 minutes. You can see that I once processed it in Deep Sky Stacker, and one time I tried it in Sequitur. So I notate all that stuff in the file names. That way it helps me keep track of what I attempted if I want to go back and try something else, something different. So so you'd want to name it, and it does create a TIFF image, 16-bit channel. That's something you probably should leave. Again, like I always say, I don't like to make changes. So astrophotographers are switching to PixInsight, and that's a paid-for program. It's really designed for astrophotographers. It's my understanding that when they first started developing it, they had astrophotographers in mind. At least that's my understanding. I don't know how true that is, so don't take that as gospel. But PixInsight has become really popular with a lot of the astrophotographers that I follow. There's a lot of built-in tools and automated processes for like star reduction, star removal, and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm already paying for a product, so I don't use PixInsight, but maybe at some day I will. Once I feel like my images are getting worth it, maybe I'll pay the extra bucks for that. So for now, I'm going to close GIMP. Again, if anybody has questions, I can try to answer them about GIMP. I've used it a little, but not as much as I have on Photoshop. So let's see if I had any. I did forget to mention back when I do image review, there's another Adobe product called Adobe Bridge. If your camera outputs an interesting raw format that most softwares can't open, it's try Adobe Bridge. It might be something that allows you to do what it says, bridge it from your source file to a file that can be used by a product like something like Photoshop. So anyway, let's go on here. So I'm going to go in and open this up, the file that I had stacked once before, and we'll just, this will be like a new version. I've processed this file a couple of times, so yeah. It was a fun image, so to work with. So when you pull it up first in Adobe Photoshop, now I don't know how many people are familiar with Adobe Photoshop, but you get this product called Creative Cloud, and you can open different versions of it. And I bought it when it was 21.25, and then they went out and upgraded and left me behind. So I still end up using 21.25. So in Adobe Photoshop, there's a lot of videos out there that will teach probably better than I'm going to teach even tonight. So, but I'm going to try to kind of go through the basics real quick, as fast as I can, hopefully not leaving people too fast or far behind too quickly. So one of the first things I do is take this layer. This is the layer panel over here, and your layout may be different. You can change this layout completely different. I've pretty much left it as the factory settings, basically. And so it should look very similar to the way I have it set up. So again, I guess I keep saying, I don't like to make changes if I don't have to. So one of the first things, and I'm kind of following a gentleman who's named Nico Carver. He has a YouTube site called Nebula Photos. Again, I'm not trying to give anybody any extra free advertisement, but I do follow him a lot, and I'm kind of following his process tonight. But there's other people's processes that I've adapted as well and use as well. So it's a kind of mishmash of other people's work. So one of the first things I do is duplicate that layer just to kind of keep track of the history, and I'll go over the history here in a second. So the first step here I usually I call it first stretch. So what we're going to do is try to take this histogram. So again, this is found by clicking right here, this little histogram button, and it'll pop that window open. And this is kind of one of those things that I really like Photoshop over GIMP, where it shows you the different colors on this top histogram, which is the combination of these ones down here. These are the individual channels of red, green, and blue. So it shows you the overlap with the colors. In GIMP, it just shows you a gray histogram. It doesn't distinguish the colors, and you'll see how that's going to come into play here in just a second. So one of the first things we'll do is try to get this away from that left side. You can see how dark the image is. We don't even see the Rosette Nebula here in the center like we did when it was in Deep Sky Stacker. So one of the first things I'd like to do is go up here to Image, go to Adjustments. I'm going to try to go slow on the menus because I know most video people do it really quick, and then go to Levels here. So we're going to adjust the levels, and we're going to start off by adjusting just the general RGB, which means let's affect all three channels at the same time. Now on the histogram, again, this is where your data is, where that spike is. Over here to the right, there's no data basically, because it's a big dark black image. So there's very few highlights. The only highlights are the stars. So what you can do the first time is go ahead and stretch your image. This is called stretching the data. So it's a little bit fatter. You see how those columns got fatter right away. So that's what you want to do. You're going to try to make those a little fatter so you can pull out the color out of the image. So I'm going to just go ahead and now one of the things is the way I'm doing it right now is what's called a destructive edit. So once I make this change, it's kind of permanent because there's a way to get around that. So I'm gonna go ahead and click OK. So the way to get around that is through the History tab up here. You can always go back through the history and delete your step, whatever you just did. So I could just go back and delete that, and we'd be back to square one. So that's the way you get around it. But the way I just did that levels edit is called a destructive, because it's not something I can go over here to my layers and turn on and off. I can see what it was originally, but I can't see the individual layer or level edit that I did. There's no way to just turn that one particular edit off. So that's why I call these destructive edits. So I'm gonna do that again. That lightened my image pretty well, but still not very light. So I'm gonna stretch it again. Just again, I'm trying to get some of those histograms on the right side of this window to be a little fatter. So we're getting into the real data. So again, I just stretched and said yes. And then if you notice, there's this little triangle here, basically saying I haven't been updated the histogram properly. So I always click it just to make sure I know that my histograms are updated. Now, one thing at this point, you notice that the red channel is nice and fat, and it's the one furthest to the right. And you can see that clearly up here on the top as well. What I want to do to try to make this a little bit more balanced is color balanced is by pushing these columns for green and blue to the right. So I'm going to do another destructive edit, levels again, but this time I'm going to select here on which channel I want to change. And I'm going to change the green. And what I'm going to do is, again, push this down. And if you watch the right side of my screen, you'll see that column is growing and moving right. And on top, you can see that the yellow band is getting bigger because the green and red are mixing. So that looks good to me. I mean, it's pretty fat. It's not exceeding. The green isn't jumping out a little bit, maybe on the edge right here, but that's not bad. So I would say, yeah, that looks good. So I'm going to do that same exact process. I'm going to try to push this blue column over and get it to be more in line so that they are all stacked up. So I'm going to push it over. Again, I'm grabbing the highlight of the blue channel and sliding it to the left until it lines up properly. Now, I didn't switch the channel, and that's why everything was moving. So if you start doing that, you see that something's really crazy, you can always hit cancel, which is another great thing. But so what I forgot to do, though, was change my channel so that I'm only editing the blue channel. And now you can see only the blue one's moving. And again, I'm going to try to line it up so that that blue channel is right underneath, all lined up. And up on top, there's no separation between the different colors. So click OK and say, yeah, OK, that looks pretty good. Now you notice the image has gone pretty flat colored. And you can start to see some vignetting on my image, and that's that's a result of my imaging train. So that's something we can take care of right away, which I may as well do right now, which we'll go and crop it, so I don't have that information interfering with my histograms. So I'm just going to use the crop tool up here. It's a pretty standard tool in most imaging editing softwares. And I'm going to get rid of those corners because I can see my targets right there. And I'm going to bring it down. And at this point, you're going to start using your eye, your artistic eye at this point, because the reason they split this crop tool up into these segments or these quadrants, or no, quadrant, whatever it's, segments, I'll just call them segments, is because of the rule of thirds. There's a third up here, there's a third here. So what I try to do is I either try to center my object, but let's say I have a bright object, like let's say this bright star here. I want to balance it out with maybe negative space. So this is where, again, the artistic side of you can come into play, and you can try to frame up your image exactly how you want it. Let's say you wanted this extra bright star up here for whatever reason. Okay, or there's some more nebulosity up there. So the only challenge with doing a crop at this time is maybe you don't see everything that's in that image. So actually, I will go ahead and back out so you can stop that process. You can say, no, don't do this. You can hit escape. I can hit escape at this point, and it'll back out and not do that edit. So let's go ahead and move on. And or you could have used your history. If you did end up hitting OK, and then you realize you cut off some of the nebulosity around this target, you could always go back through your history and delete that crop, but it would remove all subsequent edits. So that may not be what you want to do. All right, so now I'm going to do a non-destructive edit on this. I'm going to increase the saturation. So again, what that's going to do to my histograms is try to fatten those things. So I'm going to increase the saturation a little bit here. just a little, just to try to get those histograms to fatten out a little bit. So that looks good. Now this is a non-destructive edit because I can sit here and turn it off and on and see if I like the change. So what it did by doing that, increasing that saturation, it did add some red hue to the entire image, and hopefully you all can see this on your screen. And so that looks okay. But I can, if I didn't like that red hue that it introduced everywhere, I can go into the color balance and adjust that. But to be honest, I don't need to do that because this is a relatively red object. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go in and I right-clicked on that layer, and now I'm just going to delete that layer. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a curves. So the levels, curves, color balance, and hue and saturation, or this vibrance tool, those are some of your primary things that you're going to constantly be using to try to get your images to pop out. So in this case, I'm going to go back to my curves tool, and what I want to do is what's called an astro curve, which is basically this. Now you don't want this line to go all the way to the top because you're going to start clipping data, and you don't want to clip data. You want to keep as much data as possible. So there's that. You can see how it increased the brightness of the whole image. So if you're pulling up, if your point that is created on the line is over here, you're increasing the highlights. If it's down here, you're changing the darks. So what I did was kind of in the middle, increase the whole image. I want everything to brighten up. So that looks pretty good. Now, what I might do at this point is go ahead and say, I want to create a second stretch. I want to adjust these. Now, some people go through a really long process of creating a mask to identify highlights and blacks and all that stuff, but I'm not going to do that. That's really involved. But I'm going to just kind of, I know I'm already getting long. So I'm going to do what's a keystroke here. It's called Control, Alt, Shift, and E is an echo. And what that does is to say, take what's on the screen now and give me a copy of it. And it creates it as a layer. So there's a menu way to do it. I've just learned the shortcut key. So my apologies for that. But so I'm going to call this my second. I'm going to call this my second stretch. I just double click to get that, and I'm going to mess around with those permanent edits again with my levels. So I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. Sorry if I am going too fast. First thing I'm going to do is set my blacks. You can see this black is not even in the data. So I'm going to reset my blacks. I'm going to slide this over, pull those bumps back over. Now I might be losing a little bit of dark data here because you can see there's a little histogram, but for the most part, it's probably not important. And it could be coming from my vignette, so I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm going to click OK. You can see how that got pulled over. Okay, and again, I'm going to speed this up a little bit more. Adjustments, again, same thing over and over again. I'm going to pull this over, try to lighten the image now that I just darkened it, and try to get more of those colors to show up. So I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to hit my triangle here again to make sure my histograms are updated properly. Looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go back to non-destructive changes. So what I'm going to do is add some contrast. So this is a typical curve edit. So you pull down the blacks, you want the darks to go down, but then you pull up the mid and the highlights. And this is called the S curve. And it is used for not just astro imaging, it's used for most image editing that is done on, and it adds contrast to your image. So now my rosette is really starting to pop out. There is a little nebulosity outside there. I might have cropped it earlier, but at this point I am going to crop it just to get rid of those edges that I don't want. I don't want to worry about my my vignette. And I'll try to frame it up how I want. So that looks good. I'm not going to take long on that. So that's you know, where I cropped it to, a little off from center. Trying to hurry up a little bit here. Fit it on screen so it's a little more blown up. So that's the magnify tool. At this point, there's two quick things I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to kind of try to wrap things up because, again, You can do this all day long. You can let your creative side come out and do this. Keep tweaking each little channel. You can go to these other tabs and really start working with things. You can create masks. You can do all sorts of things. But these are some high-level edits that you can do, again, in GIMP or all your other editing tools that should do basically the same thing and get you similar results. So my next change, actually, I am going to add quick vibrance and saturation. I want to make that object pop out quite a bit. It's getting much better. And then what I'm going to do from there is go and create another layer, that keystroke action that I was talking about. And I'm going to call this one ACR, because that's what Nico does. It stands for Adobe Acrobat Filter, which is up here. So you go up here, you go to Filter, and you go Camera Raw Filter. So what that's going to do is bring up another element. It's almost going to bring up what's exactly like, sorry, I don't know what that is or why this popped up. So anyway, must have been a new update. The sliders are very similar to the Lightroom edits. So at this point, I do want to do that type. So, but I typically only use this for some basic edits. First, if I want to warm up my image, I could warm it up by adding some, well, warming up would be this way. Cooling it off is going towards the blues to bring that blue color out a little bit. I like the blue or purple. Adjust the tint, maybe a little too purple. Maybe you want to adjust your blacks to make them a little darker, but that looks a little too contrasty to me. Another thing is, of course, again, playing with your vibrance and saturation. Again, you're using the same edits over and over again. Dehaze is a great slider. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, and you can play with all these sliders, and but once you do it, you'll be able to apply that. Now, the main reason I use this filter is because of the detail. So why I'm in here, if you notice, it switches to this, my cursor is turned to a magnifying glass. If I zoom in, there's not too bad, but there's some grain and color noise coming through. Not much on this image because it's a pretty decent image. But I usually do use the noise reduction and the color noise reduction. So you may lose a little detail doing this, especially like when working on galaxies, but on this image, it should be okay. So that's what I typically use that tool for. So then you just click OK, and it comes back here, and you can see that changed it dramatically. But again, if you didn't like it, you're like, wait, do I like it better there or there? I like it better there. So that's why, again, these layers, or if you didn't like how strong that edit was, you can adjust its opacity on this particular layer by selecting this layer and then just adjusting its opacity. Let's say I don't want it to influence the image that much, so I'm going to slide it down a little bit, let's say down to 66%, and now it's affected it, but not as much as it originally did. I like the 100%, so I'm going to leave it there. Let's see. At this point, I would probably do a little bit more stretching and some more curve edits. Let's throw another curve edit in there. I'm going to move my black up a little. Again, I'm going to just grab the little triangle at the bottom. There's my blacks. Do another S curve, add a little more contrast, but not much. No, that's way too dark. So like that. But now if I bring up my highlights, there we go. So there we go. All right, so that's pretty good. I'll leave that alone. Now, one last thing. Again, I'm going to go Control, Alt, Shift, E. I'm supposed to turn on my keycast so you can see that. I'm going to do what's called a star reduction because there's a lot of stars in this on this target. And again, now there's a tool, an outside of Photoshop tool called StarNet. If you can get it working on your system, it does a great job on something like a nebula. StarNet++. It's a little script that you run on your computer if you can get it to work on your computer. I couldn't get it to work. And it will eliminate the stars from your image so that you can work on just the nebula. So I don't promote that product because, like I said, I couldn't get it to work on my computer. but I can do it another way, which is what I'm gonna do right now. So I'm gonna do it again. I'm trying to speed up because I know I'm probably going long here. So what I'm gonna do is what's called a color range selection. So I'm trying to select all those stars and try to kind of knock them down on intensity. So what I'm gonna do is a color range, and what I'm gonna do is normally you can use the eyedropper tool to select what you want to affect or select. But what I'm going to do to make it simple is go down to here on highlights, because the stars will be the highlights. And you can already show, it shows you a little bit of what it looks like. You can adjust these sliders to say, yeah, I don't want that many. Or, you just, oh, that's too much for sure. I don't want to affect those stars. I don't necessarily really want to affect those stars in the heart of the nebula, but why not? And again, you can just keep adjusting these sliders a little bit here and there to get the amount of stars you want to get rid of. So this is just selecting, so it's nothing destructive, you're just selecting. So now you'll see what's called the marching ants show up. But if you zoom in, you would see that it's really specific on its selection. So what most people do when they're doing this in Photoshop is they go in and modify it. So they typically expand the selection so it grabs a little bit of the area around that star. I'm going to do, 2 pixels is fine, I guess. Maybe, actually, I'll go down to 1 pixel. So it's going to expand my selection by 1 pixel. So now I've made my selection just 1 pixel bigger in around what it selected. The next thing is I'm going to do what's called a feather. So again, I'm changing my selection settings. So I want a feather. Now feather means I don't want a really sharp drop off from this selection. I want a gradual drop off from this selection. So I'm going to feather it by 2 pixels. Sure. Okay, that's fine. So I'll say okay. And then I can simply go into, now that I've got my star selected that I want to affect, I can go in here under filter and say other. And there's, again, different programs will have them in different places. I'm going to do what's called minimum. It's going to bring up a window. It's going to show me a sample of what I'm doing. One thing you want to do is make sure it says preserve roundness, which of course we want round stars. And then this slider will show you how much it's really going to affect the stars that you've got selected. So let's try to get to a bigger star. There we go. Some of these bigger stars. So you can adjust this as much as you want. You can almost knock them out completely, which is not really probably what you want, because then you'll see that it gets muddy. It muddies the image. So we want to keep a little bit of that star there, not as much as that, maybe. It's probably still too high. It's actually pretty good where I started it. 1.7. Okay, that's close enough. So I'm going to say that's good enough. And you can use the zoom in and zoom out to look at certain parts of the image. So, and of course, this is showing a preview. So you click OK. And yeah, it didn't take too long. So now you still got the marching ants going, so you need to turn that selection off. So you go up here to select and then deselect, and there you go. Now, wow, now I can really see my nebula much better. I've de-emphasized those stars. I still have some stars, some of the bigger ones especially are obvious. So if you're trying to focus on the nebula, that's how you do a quick star reduction. If you can't get some product like StarNet++ to work to do it automatically for you. So again, you would think me being kind of the lazy guy who wants to do everything automated would figure out how to get StarNet++ to work, but I found this way to do star reduction and it worked for me, or at least to the point where I'm satisfied. So again, at this point, any further edits are going to be almost iterations of what I just went over. Those are your basics: levels, curves, vibrance, saturation, hue, color balance. I didn't even do a color balance on here really, but it doesn't really need it on this one. And then the Adobe Camera Raw filter, I almost always use it just because it's got the nice, easy to use sliders. And then if the target has that many stars around it, like this image did, I would do a star reduction. I don't always do a star reduction because, again, like when you're photographing, let's say M101, something like that, there aren't a lot of stars around. Well, it's not overwhelmed with stars, I should say, and you don't need to worry about them. So you may not always do a star reduction process. And again, even just to show you the difference, you can turn off that. That's with the stars, and then star reduction, there's with the star reduction. So that's why doing all these layers and having layers available to you is nice. So going back to the original product I showed you, the one right that comes with your camera, like for me, it's the Capture NX. It may let you do some edits, but it's not going to let you have this amount of control. And that's, you know, what you need, and why you need to do all your pictures in raw format, so that you can do this much manipulation of the data that you have. And obviously, the more data you have, the better you'll be able to manipulate it. So I would probably crop this down and save it off. And what I typically will do is save it as a Photoshop image, so that I could come back later and tweak all these layers. But then I also almost always export it. So I would go up here to File and Export and save it for legacy, for web legacy. So that'll create a JPEG out of it. And that way you can post it to Facebook like I usually do, or whatever other site you might want to send it to. So that way you can have also a smaller file. If you want to send it to friends and your family and your emails or whatever, you can create a smaller JPEG image out of this. So that's typically the process I go through to get my images. And hopefully you can see how just those basic edits will get almost everything out of your image that you want. Like I said, you can go to extreme levels where you're isolating the individual channels and manipulating those individual channels. But for me, if it looks good to my eye, I'm happy with it. So my final processing is what we just basically did. It's called reprocessing. So those cloudy nights and winter nights, you know, when you want to do something astronomy related, but you don't want to go out and freeze. So what I will do is pull up some of my old images and reprocess them. You saw that I had done this also through Sequitur. I stacked it, and I pulled it back in here and edited it. And then almost every time I reprocess an image, it comes out different. And one time it has a much more red hue. Sometimes it maybe have more blue hue to it. So it's something you can do to go back and again, it's kind of one of those reasons why I keep all those files so that I can do a restack of the raw images, raw files. Some people, once they stack it, they throw away their raw files because it does eat up a lot of disk space. So that, you know, obviously is up to you and how much disk space you have. So this image, if you noticed early on in the presentation, is my background. I did save it, and you can see it looks quite different. Look how much yellow the stars are in the background on this one than what we just did. So I would say I almost like this one better than the previous one. So maybe because it's just cropped a little bit differently. So that's my final step is what I call reprocessing. So Drew, or whoever is managing things, do we have any questions? Or
we don't have any new ones that have popped up in either of the feeds for me, so I think we're doing it. I guess I had one question, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah, no, go ahead.
Along the way, I've done a lot of computer work and a lot of image processing of various sorts over the years. And I know that you might just think of it as the automatic thing that Photoshop does, but I was wondering about if you have a practice of saving your files along the way while you're doing things. Again, for some people, it's just like, if you have Photoshop set to automatically save for you periodically, it's something it's doing, but in some other programs, it might not have that, so.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned that because, like I said, they just recently did an update to the Photoshop version I have, and it's been crashing more often. And I did lose my entire edit that I had done up to that point. So it's, for me, my edits are simple enough where I think even if it doesn't save in the middle of my edits, that because I don't think I have automatic saving set on here right now, mainly because I want my processor focused on what I'm doing, not what it wants to do or what some program wants it to do. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something you should be mindful of. If you're working on a slower system or a system that's not as beefy as mine, yeah, you probably do want to save quite frequently because trying to get it back to the exact point is it can be really hard because unless you're writing down numbers, I mean, you can do that. You can pull up the eyedropper and say, tell me what exactly this area of the image is. What's the RGB values of every little pixel in there. And if you're to that level of editing, yeah, I'd be constantly saving. But for me, if it looks pleasing to my eye, that's for me. And again, I can redo these edits pretty quick, so I don't necessarily bother with it. But yeah, I know some people do save quite frequently.
So otherwise, you're just getting compliments on the good talk. So that's what's popping up.
Oh well, I appreciate those who are watching, and I hope once we do post this up to YouTube, that people will go over there to the NAA's web channel and to the video and subscribe and like our videos.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chris. From all of us out here in the audience, we really appreciate you sharing your experience and your expertise with us.
No problem.
I guess we're ready to sign off, folks. Again, as Chris just noted, if you're watching us on YouTube, hey, subscribe, and you'll get notices when we post new videos, which we will continue to do. It's been, as has been noted in our past few videos, we're going to be returning to live in-person presentations before too long, starting in August, but we do plan to continue on recording those presentations and adding them to our YouTube offering. So for people who have come from outside of the area and gotten used to us, or who won't be able to make it to in-person meetings for a while, we do hope to continue sharing that way. Otherwise, from all of us here, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you out here on the airwaves again. Good night, everybody.